Earlier this month, we put up a video about the upcoming Sega Genesis Mini, the US version. I did some research and I found useful information that I think makes predicting which games will actually be included much more certain. And so I am now radically departing from my previous predictions. And I have to tell you, I've heard a lot of other speculation around this thing, and I think that we're all pretty far off the mark. So let's get into it. What's the deal with the Sega Genesis Mini? And how is it that I think I now know what's probably going to actually show up? So, as you know, Sega has made two separate announcements about what games are going to be included. The initial announcement got everyone excited because Castlevania Bloodlines was included. Then a couple of weeks later, we got Mickey's Castle of Illusion, Contra Hardcore, and Earthworm Jim, along with a bunch of typical stuff that we were all expecting like Streets of Rage 2 and Sonic. The point is that Castlevania, Contra, Earthworm Jim, and Castle of Illusion, when taken together, have given rise to the intuition that with the Sega Genesis Mini, virtually anything is possible. So then you've got people like myself predicting wild things like the Ninja Turtles Hyperstone Heist or Disney's Aladdin, like somehow Sega has a secret team of ninja lawyers that are just going around and threatening media companies to hand over the rights to all these IPs. But what we're all forgetting here is that this console is being developed by M2, not ninja lawyers. In case you don't know, or you didn't see our other video on this, M2 is a Japanese development company famous for their high-quality emulation work. If you've ever played an old Sega Genesis game on a Nintendo console, then it's almost certain that you played a game that was emulated by M2. And so I researched M2's entire game emulation history, which turns out to be mostly ports of classic Sega games to contemporary consoles, and I have discovered the following things. Every single game that has been announced so far has either already been worked on by M2 years ago, mostly for the Wii Virtual Console, or is currently being worked on now for various retro Konami collections, which is how we came by Castlevania Bloodlines and Contra Hardcore in the first place. With only one strange exception, every single game is from a relatively narrow pre-existing library of games, and that even includes Mickey's Castle of Illusion, which was actually ported to the PS3 years ago by M2 as a bonus game for people who pre-ordered the Castle of Illusion remake. In fact, it also turns out that M2 actually did every single Sega Genesis game that ever came out on the Wii Virtual Console back in the day. And again, with almost no exception, what we're actually looking at here with the Genesis Mini turns out to be mostly nothing more than a collection of games that M2 emulated onto the Wii. And that includes the seemingly groundbreaking inclusion of Earthworm Jim that everyone's excited about. In fact, M2 even did the sequel, Earthworm Jim 2, for the Wii as well. Therefore, if we want to know what games might actually show up on the Sega Genesis Mini, then we really just need to look at the relatively narrow list of games already completed by M2 over the years, and or the games that are currently being completed by them, as is the case with Contra Hardcore and Castlevania Bloodlines. Look at that! There's Sonic and Knuckles. Anyway, I'm going to share a link to this page in the comments. If you count up all the games already emulated by M2, then we're looking at a collection of around 90 games or so to choose from. This narrows down the possibilities radically, given the fact that the Sega Genesis Mini is coming out relatively soon, and that M2 has a lot of other things to do like all these cool Konami collections, then I think it's safe to assume that unless it can be found on this website right here, then it's probably not going to show up on the Sega Genesis Mini. So Disney's Aladdin, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the Hyperstone Heist? No dice, guys. Not only are these games marred by licensing issues, but M2 has never emulated them. However, as I mentioned, there is one strange counterexample to all of this. The Mickey games are different. Castle of Illusion, as I said, did not appear on the Virtual Console like the rest of these games, but rather was done separately as a promotion for a PS3 game. But the World of Illusion up until now has never been emulated by M2, and nor did it appear on the Virtual Console or any of their many retro game packages that they've released over the years for Sega. It's a complete anomaly. One possibility could be that since the World of Illusion is the sequel to Castle of Illusion, M2 simply went ahead and completed both games under the same license, at the same time, just in case the opportunity to peddle it finally presented itself in the future. And now all these years later, the opportunity has arrived. Or maybe M2 is currently working on a yet-to-be-announced Disney collection for the Switch, which might hopefully also include hidden gems like Quackshot starring Donald Duck. Who can say? But I hope it's the latter. Knowing what I know now, it looks like my predictions were not very good. First of all, I predicted a bunch of classic games by Capcom, including Strider, Ghouls and Ghosts, and Street Fighter 2. Even though the Sega Genesis Mini is going with the 3-button controller, and Street Fighter 2 is made for the 6-button controller. What I didn't know at the time is that Capcom is also putting out their own plug-and-play arcade hits console this fall, and it will include all 3 of their biggest Sega Genesis games, Strider, Ghouls and Ghosts, and Street Fighter 2. I think it's safe to assume that Capcom, in order to enhance the relevance and commercial viability of their own product, isn't going to allow these games to appear on the Sega Genesis Mini. So, sorry guys, bummer. Also, like a lot of people, I speculated that perhaps we'd get more popular licensed games, such as Aladdin or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: The Hyperstone Heist. But like I said earlier, neither of these games appears in M2's backlog. Also, Aladdin wasn't made by Sega, like Castle of Illusion and World of Illusion, but were actually made by 2 companies that don't even exist anymore, Virgin and Disney Interactive. Finally, a ton of people are predicting EA games for this thing, especially the Desert Strike and Road Rash series of games. However, M2 has never done a single game by Electronic Arts, and therefore I think it's almost certain that we won't see any of their games either. So Desert Strike fans like myself are going to have to look elsewhere. Sorry guys, it's another bummer. The good news is that M2 has emulated a bunch of other games, and most of them are great. So that all being said, what actually is going to show up on the Sega Genesis Mini anyway? Here is a refined list of the top 22 games that I actually think have a good chance of showing up on the console. Why 22 games when there are only 20 more possibilities on a 40-game console? Because I don't actually believe there are only going to be 40 games, but that there's going to be an Easter egg game included like Star Fox 2 on the Super NES Classic. So, without further ado, number 22, Shining in the Darkness. While I'd much rather see Shining Force 2, since it's the best in the Shining series, Shining Force 2 was developed by Camelot, and so far the Mini has been favoring games made by their associates at Climax Entertainment, the same Climax Entertainment with whom Camelot co-developed the original Shining Force game, which is already announced on the Mini. Climax also did Landstalker 2, and that's also on the Mini. The only other game they co-developed with Camelot was this game, the excellent early Genesis RPG Shining in the Darkness, and while it's no Phantasy Star 4, it's still a great addition to the console. Number 21, Alien Soldier. Since the Mini already has at least one other game by Treasure, it should come as no surprise if we get at least one more. Dynamite Headdy is more well known, but the Mini has too many mascot platformers to compete with as it is, and it's the action-packed Alien Soldier that really stirs up the most excitement with contemporary gamers, since it was only ever released on the short-lived Sega channel, meaning no one in the US got to play it, and a mystique is built up around it. It was kind of a big deal when M2 brought it back to US audiences for the Wii, and so I fully expect them to play the same trick twice. This game would make great bonus content. Number 20, Ristar. Ristar was built upon the same game engine as the Sonic series, and it's easily one of the best platformers for the Genesis. If I'm being honest with myself, they might actually play better than the Sonic games. However, it was a late Genesis release, and was already deeply overshadowed by the next generation of consoles by the time it came out. Thankfully, Ristar's grabby arms have somehow found their way onto virtually every other Sega Genesis compilation as of late, and I expect this collection to be no different. Number 19, Pulseman. One of M2's best gimmicks is bringing previously unreleased or hard-to-get games to US audiences, and they did just that when they ported Pulseman to the Wii Virtual Console. Developed by Game Freak in 1994, just before they made it huge with the Pokemon series, Pulseman is a colorful action platformer with an inventive and fun electricity-based set of play mechanics. I really hope we get the vibrant and charming Pulseman instead of the stale, bare-bones Vectorman that keeps appearing so frequently in recent years. M2 likes surprises. This game would be a very pleasant surprise, and so I think it's a contender. Number 18, Monster World 4. Speaking once more of games that never appeared as a retail game in the US, M2 gave the cult hit Monster World 4 full English translation, and brought it over to the US for the first time on the Wii Virtual Console. They also included this game as part of a Monster World compilation for the PS3, and I think also the Xbox. The sequel to the Wonder Boy action-adventure games, Monster World 4 is a classic Metroidvania before Metroidvania was even a thing. Given M2's unique history with this game and Monster World's high standing with hardcore Sega fans, I consider this a certainty. Expect it. We're gonna get at least one game in the Wonder Boy series no matter what, and this is probably it. Number 17. Rocket Knight Adventure. Since M2 is currently working very closely with Konami, doing both their upcoming Castlevania collection and the Contra collection, I think there's a very good chance that Konami will allow M2 to dive even deeper into their Sega Genesis lineup. And no game title in that illustrious library deserves the mini console treatment more than Rocket Knight Adventures. This game has never been emulated by M2 before, but Rocket Knight really is one of the all-time great hidden gems on the Sega Genesis lineup, and the fact that M2 is so involved with Konami right now just makes this an unmissable opportunity. I really expect to see it. Number 16. Phantasy Star 4. M2 has worked a lot in the Phantasy Star series in the past, which has always been Sega's premier RPG series. And while it's a stretch to think that they'd include the older Phantasy Star 2 or 3, which really haven't aged all that well, Phantasy Star 4 still holds up as one of the greatest RPGs of all time. Told in the form of high-quality semi-animated comic book panels, Phantasy Star 4 has one of the most coherent and satisfying storylines in any video game ever, even if the gameplay itself is still a bit more predictable. Decades after I first beat this game on my original Genesis, I still feel like it's one of my personal top 10 games of all time, and it's easily the best JRPG on the Genesis. It's gonna be there this coming September, no matter what. Number 15. Beyond Oasis. The best action RPG on the Genesis, Beyond Oasis is also one of the key Genesis games developed by Yuzo Koshiro's development company, Ancient. Given Yuzo Koshiro's proximity to this project, he's coming on board to do original new music for the menu screens, and the key role this game plays in filling the nearly empty action-adventure genre void on the Genesis, I think we can guarantee its inclusion. It's not quite a Zelda clone, even though it uses that overhead perspective and has a world of fantasy to explore. It's actually more of a beat-em-up action game with an explorable open world. It's a unique game, and it's the kind of thing that M2 seems to like. Expect it. Number 14. Virtua Fighter 2. This one might seem way off base to a lot of people, but the Mini has no other fighting games, and unlike that other first-party Sega fighting franchise, Eternal Champions, Virtua Fighter 2 is actually playable with the 3-button controller. And the Genesis version, strangely enough, was actually already ported to the Wii Virtual Console by M2. Could M2 do the same trick here in order to give us a fighting game for the Mini? I really think so. It's far from perfect, and it's not actually 3D, but it does still somehow manage to capture that delightful mid-90s Virtua Fighter spirit, and that's pure Sega all the way. The game's are actually pretty good. I'm calling it. Virtua Fighter 2, warts and all, will be included. It's not that bad. You'll like it. Try it. Number 13. Virtua Racer. So if M2 includes Virtua Fighter 2, then I can guarantee that they will include the Genesis port of the arcade hit Virtua Racer. In fact, M2 just released the arcade version of this game for the Switch a short while ago, so they've already given this franchise some time and consideration. At the time of its release, this was a special $100 cartridge containing an enhancement chip to make 3D graphics renderable to the Genesis. And so putting this on the Mini is just the sort of thing M2 would do. I mean, just think of the savings. You'll be getting a crazy expensive $100 Genesis game, plus at least 39 other Genesis games for the price of $80. Has Sega lost their minds? Number 12. The Revenge of Shinobi. My favorite Shinobi game by far, Revenge of Shinobi has been re-released just about as many times as Sonic the Hedgehog and Altered Beast. Therefore, I think history is about to repeat itself. Yes, even though we're already getting Shinobi 3, the soundtrack is one of the best ever, and it was all done by legendary Yuzo Koshiro, and again, I really think we're going to be getting everything that man has ever touched on the Genesis. So expect to kill Godzilla and Spider-Man with your infinite shurikens for the 100th time. It's the Sega way. Number 11. Musha. A lot of people have been speculating that maybe this expensive and highly sought-after collector's item could find its way to the Mini, and given the fact that M2 has already ported this gem to the Wii Virtual Console, I really have to agree. The game was also made by the legendary developer of pretty much all the best 8 and 16-bit shooters, Compile. And Compile already has a game on the Mini, in the form of their hit puzzle game Puyo Puyo 2, aka Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine. I think we can expect to add at least one more Compile game to the Mini. Save your money and grab a Mini. It's going to be the cheapest way to buy Musha in 2019. Number 10. Gain Ground. Gain Ground is a lesser known and underrated Sega arcade game that was ported to a bunch of consoles back in the day, even the TurboGrafx CD. M2 brought the Genesis version back to the Wii Virtual Console, which gave the game far more notoriety than it's enjoyed in the past, and now it's more well known than ever. But in case you didn't know, it's a unique capture the flag-like game that emphasizes puzzle solving and strategy over reflexes and button mashing. And it's also a great two-player experience. Its inclusion would bring both that classic Sega arcade touch and provide some much needed diversity to the Mini's lineup. I fully expect to see it in September. Number 9. Alien Storm. Another classic Sega arcade game that makes a great two-player Genesis experience. The best description for this game is Golden Axe in Space! It really captures that Sega look. I'm almost certain these character designs had to have been made by Ryoko Kodama, whose artwork pretty much dominates Sega from the mid-80s to late 80s. Though Alien Storm is not as well known as its barbarian-themed cousin, Golden Axe, it transcends that game by delivering some surprisingly diverse play experiences, like these fun first-person shooter levels where you get to destroy everything. Once again, it's a game that M2 has already worked on, and it really conveys that classic Sega feel very well. I'm calling it Alien Storm is gonna be there. Number 8. Rolling Thunder 2. I noticed that the Japanese Mega Drive Mini is going to be getting a Namco game, and I realized this probably means the US is going to be getting a Namco game too. Probably the two best contenders would be the excellent, if not somewhat niche Splatterhouse 2, or the lesser well-remembered Rolling Thunder 2, and I think it's going to be the latter. Rolling Thunder 2 provides a two-player simultaneous co-op, and it has that classic Shinobi-like gameplay style. In fact, I'm pretty sure the original Shinobi game was actually just a Rolling Thunder clone with ninjas. Again, this is already a part of M2's Genesis catalog, and so I think there's a really good chance that we'll see it. Number 7. Gauntlet 4. 1994's Gauntlet 4 may not have been released on the Wii Virtual Console by M2, but it's the only game that M2 actually developed explicitly for the Sega Genesis themselves, when the Sega Genesis was actually still on the market. In fact, it's the first game M2 ever developed for any console. It's a great version of Gauntlet. It's a two-player game, and it's the game that actually made M2 into a real game development company. Given all that, I fully intend to slaughter endless hordes of pixelated ghosts come this fall. Number 6. Bonanza Brothers. Bonanza Brothers is another classic Sega arcade game that makes for a very satisfying two-player experience. It's also very unique in its own right and provides a buffer against the onslaught of side-scrolling platformers and beat-em-ups that are going to be on the Mini. You and a friend play as thieves who have to simultaneously loot treasure and outsmart the police in a daring getaway. It's fast-paced, it's clever, it's funny, and it's way more fun with a friend. I think it's going to be on the Mini. Look for it. Number 5. Herzog Zwei. M2 is already one Technosoft masterpiece coming out for the Mini for sure, in the form of the excellent Thunder Force 3. But I also found out that they're currently working on emulating Technosoft's real-time strategy masterpiece, Herzog Zwei, for the Nintendo Switch later this year. Given that, I completely expect to see Herzog Zwei in the Sega Genesis Mini. This is actually a personal dream come true for me, because Herzog Zwei is my favorite Genesis game of all time, and it's one of my favorite two-player games ever made. So given the fact that Technosoft already has a game on the Mini, and that it's the game credited with inventing the real-time strategy genre, and M2 is already working on it, just like they are Castlevania Bloodlines and Contra Hardcore, then I give you my personal guarantee that Herzog Zwei will be on the Mini. Number 4. Columns. Every classic game compilation needs at least one or two puzzle games, and by far the most popular example of a puzzle game on the Genesis was of course the ubiquitous Columns. It's not as much fun or influential as Tetris, nor is it as inventive as Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine, but it's an old standard for Sega gamers, and its inclusion is almost certain. It's as certain as Sonic the Hedgehog himself. It was also a good 2-player game, so expect to see it. Bam! Number 3. Golden Axe. M2 has ported the Golden Axe games many times. There are 3 Golden Axe games to choose from, but the first one is the best, and virtually inseparable from the Sega Genesis itself. It's also yet another 2-player game to make good use of those dual 3-button controllers. Regardless of whether or not you pick Red Sonja, Conan the Barbarian, or that badass little short guy, expect to be bonking skulls and kicking ass with Golden Axe later this fall. Number 2. Streets of Rage. It may seem like a redundancy to include the original game with the superior Streets of Rage 2 already being included, but remember, this is going to be the Yuzo Koshiro machine, and the original Streets of Rage is Yuzo Koshiro's best work as a game composer. Just listen to that opening score once more. Seem like overkill, but expect to see the original Streets of Rage for even more 2-player butt-kicking action. Number 1. Sonic 3, or Sonic & Knuckles. A couple of weeks ago there was a remastered version of Sonic 3 released online, and in 2009 Christian Whitehead of Sonic Mania fame approached Sega to remaster the game himself. But for years now, there haven't been any re-releases of Sonic 3 official from Sega, even though M2 actually did do them for the Wii Virtual Console back in 2007. Supposedly this has something to do with legal issues surrounding the fact that the late Michael Jackson worked on some of the game's soundtrack. I have no idea, but at the same time I fully expect that the Sega Genesis Mini could be the game's big comeback. In fact, I think it will be, probably becoming this thing's so-called system seller, given how many people want to see this game come back into the limelight. I'm calling it. Sonic 3 is making its grand return this fall. You hear me? Yeah! There you have it. These are our top 22 games that we think are coming to the Sega Genesis Mini. Not necessarily the games we love the best, but the games that we think make the most sense. The games we think are most likely given reality as it is. So what do you think of our predictions, and what games do you think are coming to the Sega Genesis Mini? Please let us know in the comments. Thank you for watching. Bye!